We are ready to pick up from the end of the last lab, and I did send a little more traffic over, so we've got some extra matches here. But again, our access list that has been applied to the VTY lines on router 1, and we're letting router 2 in from 172.12.123.2, and we are denying everybody else, including our poor friend over at 172.12.123.3. What's coming up are a couple of my favorite videos in the course of my favorite section, and we're going beyond the exam a little bit here, as I like to do anyway, with some real-world examples, but definitely some good stuff for you here where you will learn from my pain, and I'm glad somebody's going to. So let's go ahead and talk about this time range that we're going to work with now, because sometimes you're going to run into situations in networking where you might want to permit traffic during a certain period of time. You might want to allow Telnet during a certain period of time, or you might want to deny something for a certain period of time. And the last thing you really want to do is, make a note to yourself, okay, at 7 o'clock p.m. I need to take this ACL off and then put it back on at 5 o'clock in the morning. That obviously is an incredibly inefficient way to handle it. But what is an incredibly efficient way to handle it is a time range. Now we're going to write the time range separately from the ACL. The very tail end of the ACL line is going to call this time range, and it will be valid only during the time that we define. So let's go forward with that and write our first time range. And we're going to call it time range telnet allowed. A good rule of thumb here, this didn't happen to me, but it's first one of those real world things I was telling you about a minute ago. Don't ever name a time range or an ACL or anything on your routers or switches. Don't ever name it a word that you would be uncomfortable reading in a meeting with mixed company. That's all I'm going to say. It wasn't me, but I was there, and it wasn't pretty. So let's move on with time range telnet allowed and take a look at our choices. And we've got absolute and periodic as our main choices here, because otherwise we have default, exit, and no, and we may use one of those here, but absolute and periodic are your two choices for the actual types of time ranges. And with periodic, what you're looking at there is a recurring need for this time range. Every weekday, weekends only, every Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, anything like that where you're going to want it to run in a recurring fashion. Absolute is just what it sounds like. You're saying, hey, I want this line of the ACL to take effect from 9 a.m. on this date to noon on this date, and that's it. I'm going to show you both. We're going to spend most of our time with periodic because that's what I expect you'll run into more in the real world. The absolute time and date format, it's more just getting the syntax down than anything else. It's a pretty long command, but we definitely have the longest commands in the course in this section. They will be hanging off the screen and going past the prompt, and we'll see what happens then when that happens. Right now, let's go ahead and get started with periodic and see what our choices are. And again, you've got every day of the week listed, and then you have daily, which is literally every day of the week, and a weekdays and weekend option. If you choose a day of the week, those bottom three options are going to be gone. And notice starting time shows up because the iOS is saying, hey, maybe you just mean every Friday, and now I need a starting time. But you can list multiple individual days of the week. There's nothing wrong with typing in Mon, Tu, Wed, Thur, Fry if you want to do that instead of just doing, weekdays. But we're going to go with weekdays. And now we have to give it a starting time. We're going to be using military time here, I hope. 900 hours, 2, and you have to put the word 2 in there. And the ending time stays valid until beginning of next minute. I think Cisco just got tired of being asked that question by CCIE lab candidates, so they put that in. But it does stay valid until the beginning of the next minute, and that will give us 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. because what we're doing here is running a time range that will allow router 3 to telnet into router 1 if it's a weekday and if it's 9 a.m. through 5 p.m. So that's where we are, and as far as choices go, that's about it. And congratulations, you just wrote your first time range. That's all there is to it. Now let's run the command show time range, and we'll have a peek at what we wrote. There's no kind of, implicit deny in here or anything. Whatever you allow, you allow. And you notice here the word inactive. Now with show time range, inactive doesn't mean that you haven't yet applied it to an ACL. That is true, we haven't tied it into an ACL line yet, but that's not what inactive means. What inactive actually means is currently the system clock is outside of the time range you have defined. So the line you write with time range right now, it's going to be inactive. It'll be there, you'll see it, but it will not be in operation. So that is obviously an important thing to know. Let's go ahead and run show clock here, and we can see that it's 17:43 hours. So we're about 43 minutes after the time where it would have been active. And just for fun, I think we might reset the clock later and make sure we see what happens when it's active as well. But right now, we want to go ahead and tie this to an ACL, and that's our extended ACL 101. This is going to be a long command. So let's dig in, and we have access list 101, and we know it's permit TCP host 172.12.123.3. There's our source. And now we need our destination, right? Let's just review there. Yep, our destination, which is going to be any. And it's got to equal port 23. And I'm going to put a time range on the end of it. I'm going to move the screen over just a bit here for obvious reasons. I don't like to have a bigger screen than this or more room because it makes the font too small for the videos. So now I'm going to put time range, and then I'll be asked what time range, and I'll have to enter telnet allowed, telnet underscore allowed. So obviously this is going to go way off the screen. Watch what happens at the pound sign. It turned to a dollar sign, right, or right in front of it. So now when you look at it, it looks like, you know, you wrote $T and then all this stuff. Don't worry about that dollar sign showing up. That's just indicating that, hey, there's some of this command that you can't see that you just entered. So in that case, don't worry about it. Just keep on configuring. So what we should do, though, is run show IP access list. And you can see inactive is going to show up on 2 lines there. That's all we're missing. We're missing the in inactive, but we see it there. So show IP access list verifies that we just wrote. Looks pretty darn good, but we also do see inactive here as well. So when you check an access list and it does have time range sensitive commands, then it's going to show you inactive when you're outside of the time range and active when you are inside that time range. Now, besides it being inactive, we know most likely router 3 is not going to be able to telnet in right now, right? Because it's the line that's permitting it is inactive. So router 3 tries to telnet in right now, they're not going to be able to. Do you see any other problems there? Maybe I'm asking that for a reason, maybe I'm not. But I am asking it. I think you're pointing to the screen right now saying, yeah, line 20 there is the problem. Using the sequence numbers, which we were about to work with in this video and the next, a little more exclusively than we have in the past, line 10 is permitting router 2 to telnet in. We got that. Line 20 denies everything else. Deny IP and any is as final as it gets. So what happens when line 30 goes active? It doesn't matter. Line 30 doesn't matter because it will never be read. Because any traffic that doesn't match line 10 definitely matches line 20. So line 30 again is never going to be read. So we have, you know, one kind of issue and one real issue. It's kind of an issue right now that our telnet access would be inactive if that line were read, and we'll test that. You know, we'll make sure to set the clock back and we will test that line. However, the real problem is the sequencing right now, because line 30, it's never going to get read. We got to do something about that. We got to get that above line 20, if you will, and that is coming up along with a classic real-world gotcha that I can't wait to share with you, and that is coming up next.